I think my co-author is also, yeah, so in the meeting. So, hello everyone. I'm Grace from the Department of Accounting. I'm very happy to present this research project. My co-author, Lee, she is also a accounting faculty from the University of Wisconsin. So we were in one sharing program, and she's 1 year later than me. Then, so we started this project in the year 2020. So when it's just started with the pandemic, and everything like goes online. And so we both had a similar situation at that time. So we were quite new faculty, and we had a baby at home. So it's very difficult for us, like, so to go home, but we still want to do a project together. So since we want to like start a new project without our professors like guidance. Yeah. Then so she had the data for corporate social responsibility, and I had the data for the supply chain relationship. So that's how we can start this project. Then in 2020, so during the winter break, so we developed the proposal. Then so last year in February, we presented the proposal at a conference. Then in the summer break, so we worked on the data analytics part. And then during the winter break, so we finished the data analytics analysis. Then so we plan, so this summer we will like finish to write the manuscript. Then so it's added to a journal. Yeah, so that's our plan. So let's see. Motivation of this project. So this is from my friend's story. So my friend works at a small manufacturing company in Midwest. This is a very small company, and 1/3 of its sales order from Home Depot. So Home Depot is a big customer, right? Then each year, so this friend complained to me that they had to join Home Depot's program. So as volunteers, they helped like the terrorists and help those people to like painting their houses or fix houses in California or in Texas. Then, but so for them to join this program, so they had to pay everything, like their air flight ticket and their lodgings, all those expenses, and they also needed to pay for the registration fee for this kind of the program. Then, but so they are afraid. Okay, so if they didn't join this program, maybe Home Depot will be happy. Then, so what if they lost those orders? So that's why every year they join that program, and every year so which means that it's a big cost. Okay? Yeah. Then so if we check the Home Depot, okay, so the 2020 responsibility report, you can find the introduction on their program. Okay, so they said they have volunteers, right, involved. So here thousands of hours, right? But here so you cannot find anything about the suppliers, right? And then so this is from their responsibility report. Okay. Then so this story brings the research question for me. Then I want to see the first research question. Okay, does make customers' corporate social responsibility performance impact suppliers' subsequent CSR performance? Either so they are voluntary to do that, right, or they are mandatory to do that. So whether customer can impact suppliers' corporate social responsibility activity. Then the second is question. Okay, for in this relationship, suppliers and customers, so can their CSR performance impact the duration of the supply chain relationship? So for example, can suppliers, okay, if they do good, okay, can this help, right, to maintain this relationship with the customer? Then for customers, right, can they, if they do good, okay, can this will help, okay, to keep this kind of relationship? So here, corporate social responsibility, there are many different definitions. we just follow, I think, the general one. Okay, so here we use corporate social responsibility, being a firm's efforts to go above and beyond what is legally required. Then the supply chain relationship. So in this study, okay, the feature is asymmetric. So that means customer and supplier, they are not equal. They don't have equal right in this relationship. So this is due to the accounting standards requirement. So according to the accounting standards in the United States, okay, each public company should disclose their net customer. And here, so the definition of net customer is 10% of annual sales. Okay, if one company purchases more than 10% of the sales, then that is counted as a net customer. Then, so this company should disclose who is your net customer. So that's how we can get the data. Okay? So how can we know? So who's the company's net customer? And then so you can see, so those net customers are very big companies. Usually, so they are the size, the capital size, or their history from like from age, from size, okay, much bigger than suppliers. So yeah, then that's why we said the supply chain relationship is asymmetric. Okay? That's why we examine the relationship, the impact from net customer to supplier, not from supplier from net customer. Okay? So usually, yeah, if we examine the supplier's impact on net customer, usually we couldn't find anything. It's very difficult for them to impact net customers. Next, so then we need a literary review. So I want to see like if anybody did a similar research. Then so I find so for the interaction of corporate social responsibility and supply chain. So there were lots of research in supply chain management, in marketing, and in business ethics. Okay, but so most of this research are qualitative. So they're focused on, for example, literary review. Okay, or conduct a model, or develop a theory. Then, but we are accounting guys, so we like numbers. We want to see data, right? So we want to find empirical evidence, okay, based on archival data and maybe a large sample size. So that's why we do this project. Then we have two hypotheses. So according to the supply chain literature, okay, so there's a spillover effect going from net customers to suppliers. So for example, in my dissertation, so I examine customers' litigation risk, okay, how it will impact suppliers. Then I found that so when net customers, those companies, they face securities class action lawsuit. Okay, so of course this company will start for like stock price decline, right? But the suppliers, okay, they didn't do anything wrong. They will also experience stock price decline, and it lasts for 10 years. Okay. Then, so there's one study. So this is based on, I think, a small like experiment or research to find that powerful customers, their CSR orientation, okay, is to suppliers' perceived pressure. Then suppliers, so they will engage more, okay, in CSR activities. And then that's an experiment. So we want to see if we use archival, can we still find similar results? Then and we just started the project. So we found there's another professor, another study, okay, in that year. So they did the presentation in conference. So they found that customers' CSR performance was positive affect suppliers' CSR performance. So we contacted the authors, and they were very generous. So they sent us their PowerPoint. Okay. So based on these findings, we get our first hypothesis. So we expect to see there is a positive relationship between the customer CSR and the supplier from CSR performance. Then next, so there's a theory called the stakeholder theory of CSR. I think it's quite straightforward. So we say companies prefer doing business with a firm with a high CSR reputation. Then, if so, so we have the second H2A, the second hypothesis. So we want to see a positive relationship between suppliers' CSR performance and the relationship, duration of the supply chain relationship. So that means we want to see whether if customers do good, okay, can it help to get a longer supply chain relationship? Then, since there's lots of literature about customers, okay, power in the asymmetric supply chain relationship, so we also want to see whether customer sales or our performance, okay, can impact the duration of the supply chain relationship. Next, so we use data, so the data are given forms. Then the sample period from 2007 to 2016. So for forms like the financial information and the supply chain relationship, so we use the data from Compustat. Then corporate social responsibility, so we use the data set called KLD. So here shows how we can use scores to measure companies' corporate social responsibility. This database, so they use 6 dimensions to measure. So you can see community, diversity, employee relations, environment, human rights, product, and corporate governance. Then for each dimension, if the company do good, if we think that's a strength, so the company gets a positive point. Okay? If the company do bad, the company do bad, then so that's a concern. So the company will get a negative point. Then so we can measure CSR performance. We use 3 variables. The first one called net CSR. So that is the company's total strength subtract total concern. So we get a net value. The second measurement, CSR strength. So the sum of the strength scores. We see how the company did good things. Then the third one, CSR concern. So the total of the concern values. Yeah, so these are the 3 dependent variables for this study. Next, to test the first hypothesis. So the dependent variable is suppliers CSR. Then the independent variable is customer CSR. So here is a lag. That means we want to see, for example, last year's customer CSR performance impact this year's suppliers CSR performance. So we use this the lag variable since we want to exclude another possible relationship. What if supplier CSR impact customer, right? Since we use a lag variable, it's last year's impact this year, so we cannot like reverse, right? This relationship. Then so we control supplier forms, financial performance. Then we control customer forms, financial information. We also have the year fixed effects and industry fixed effects in this model. So we expect to see the coefficient R1 is positive. If so, we can say, customers, CSR performance impacts by suppliers. Then the second model. So the dependent variable, long duration, that is a dummy variable. If for example the relationship is more than the median, I think is 5 years. So if more than 5 years, then the dummy variable is 1. Otherwise, it is 0. So the second model is a logistic regression. Then we put for independent variable, we have supplier CSR and customer CSR. So for H2A, we expect beta 1 to be positive. That means if supplier do good, right, so they can get a longer relationship. Then we also expect beta 2 to be positive. So that means if customers then do good, so it will also have to get a longer relationship. So here is the result for the first test. Since I want to compare the 3 dependent variables, so I need to put the 3 tables in 1 page. So here I just I didn't show those control variables and those fixed effects. Then so we can see the first dependent variable, suppliers CSR score net value. Here is net value. Then if we use the same year, so here is not a lag, this is the same year, we can get issue of quality coefficient, and it is significant. So that means in the same year, customers CSR, there's quality relation to the supplier CSR. But we also want to see the lag variable, right? See here, so the red, that is for the year T-1. So here shows whether last year's, right, whether the previous year's customer CSR, okay, will impact current year's supplier CSR. So this variable is not significant. It is positive but not significant. Okay. Then we see leg 2, that means the year T-2, okay, to the current year, and we see a positive, okay, coefficient. Then we split this score. Okay, we want to see supplier CSR for the total strength score. So for this one, we can see, okay, all of these variables insignificant. Okay, so that means we didn't find a relationship, okay, between customer and suppliers, like they did good things. Okay, there's no significant relationship. Then, but if we see the concern at this score, so we can see all the 3 variables and the coefficients are significant at 1%. Okay, so that means there's a positive relationship, right? So if customers did bad, then suppliers, okay, then they also did bad. Then so we said, so we find the positive relationship between customer CSR and the supplier CSR, and it is dominated by CSR concern by this part. And so I think this finding is consistent with one study, okay? The Tin et al. 2017. So they found that in a closed supply chain relationship, okay, those companies, they are more likely to avoid more taxes. So that means it's easier, okay, for customers and suppliers, right? So they work together, then they pay less tax compared to other companies. Okay, compared to companies that do not have a closed supply chain relationship. Okay, they also find that if many customers, okay, they have subsidiaries in tax havens, so that is easier for them to pay less tax, right? Then suppliers, they are more likely, okay, they also will have subsidiaries in tax havens. Okay, yeah, so I think this finding is consistent with their finding. Then that's the second test. So the dependent variable, the first one we use here said the dummy, the long duration. If the relationship is more than 5 years, so 5 years is the median value. We measure like how long the relationship between the customer and the supplier. Okay, the median value is 5 years. So if they have the relationship more than 5 years, then we say that's a long duration. Okay, then that is one. So the independent variable. One is supplier CSR, another one is customer CSR, right? And so if we use net value, okay, so you can see the supplier's CSR, this is insignificant, but the customer CSR value, this is very significant. So that means H2A, this is not supported. Okay, so suppliers, there's supplier CSR performance, okay, wouldn't impact the relationship. Then it's customer. Customers' CSR performance is possible to impact the relationship. Then, so if we change the done variable, okay, so to 8 years. 8 years, this is the 75% percentile, okay? Then, so we can see this is a similar result, okay? Suppliers' value still insignificant, and the customer CSR, this is still significant, okay? Then, so we also check the CSR strength value. Okay, so you can see for strength value, this is insignificant. Okay, then another group, so this is still customer. This is the customers. Okay, CSR score has impact. Then for CSR, so the concern value. Okay, suppliers still insignificant. Then customers, so this is this is selective. This is significant. So overall, so we can see it's the customer CSR, okay, rather than supplier CSR, relates to the duration of the supply chain relationship. So that means for suppliers, right, whether you do good or bad, so you couldn't, right, impact the relationship with the main customer. Then, so it's interesting, we got the results in winter break, okay? Then by that time, so my friend contacted me again. So she said they lost at Home Depot and the main customer. and they're going to move on. Yeah. So that's the story. Yeah, so the concluded part. So I think we find that so in the supply chain relationship, okay, how customers customers CSR performance could impact suppliers, but the relationship cannot be based on the other side, right? And so I think this study contributed to the literature, since currently there's no very sparse empirical evidence on this part. So although there's no study about model or review literature, yeah, but we do want to see empirical evidence. Then limitation of this study. So we want to do the study on a large sample size, okay? But we do not think we have, this is still not a large sample size. Okay, see, we have the number of observations, 921. And this is for about 10 years. So it's, the sample size is still small, okay? Because usually the supply chain you get on the database, so if you merge with other data, so always lost observations. And we believe, so this database, so it only covers like very big companies, and not like those small companies. Yeah, so that's the limitation. Okay, so that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. Yes, we will have time for questions after our second presentation. Our second presenter today is Samantha Schochner, who is an assistant professor of accounting as well. Samantha is presenting on the question of, do corporate sustainability and earnings management interact to influence individual shareholders' investment decisions?
Oh, it's over here. I swear. There we go. So, all right. So, hi, I'm Samantha. This was my very first research project ever. So, take everything I say with a grain of salt. Yes, it is. I have to admit, I have not read it for a good couple of years. Since since my first year in the PhD program. And when I dusted it off, like literally there was dust in my computer. And I dusted it off and I'm like, ooh, I wrote this. Yeah. So equal measures embarrassed by my writing and proud of how far I've come. This paper was inspired by, I have been doing some reading about greenwashing. How many of you guys have heard of greenwashing? Yeah, so I was looking into greenwashing and I was thinking, okay, we know that shareholders care about this. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of reports out there that show that investors care about how their companies interact with the environment. At least my focus is on the environment and with the community. But there's not much evidence as to how the company's actions actually affect the shareholder, right? And so I was kind of getting into my accounting space, and I was like, oh, earnings management, that sounds interesting. And so I wanted to look and see whether or not green activities, be they greenwashing or actual authentic environmental activities, affected how shareholders viewed earnings manipulation. So my first research question is about whether the corporation's engagement in corporate sustainability affects how shareholders view earnings management, and then whether shareholder trust had any role in facilitating that relationship. So I'm going to look at the first question first,
And then the second question was kind of a secondary investigation because there wasn't much evidence as to whether this relationship with trust actually existed or not. There's not a lot in our literature about trust and whether or not companies have earned their shareholders' trust or how that interacts with the shareholders' behavior. So those are my research questions. So first, for those of you guys who are not accountants, what is earnings management? So management has a lot of influence over what goes into the financial statements. And because of how we do accounting, there is discretion involved, and they can influence the numbers that eventually are published in that report. So this might result in either increases or decreases, depending on what management's goal is, in net income. So if management's goal is to present a rosy picture of what's going on with the firm, they might increase their net income. If they want to avoid taxes, they might decrease it. So that is earnings management. Let's talk about how earnings management influences decision-making for the shareholders. So management has these incentives to manage earnings. A lot of times, employee incentives or management incentives are tied to the bottom line of the firm. And so management has this incentive to make things look really good. And so they will do this even though this may damage firm value overall. It prioritizes short-term decision-making rather than long-term thinking about how the company could grow over time. And so when shareholders actually discover this, they generally react pretty negatively. They treat it like the firm is lying to them. And so they might penalize the firm by withdrawing their support, so selling their shares. They might basically start doubting the credibility of management. And they also might look at the financial statements much more carefully because they believe that management is not being truthful to them. So now let's talk about corporate sustainability. So corporate sustainability is actually this kind of holistic view of the firm in not only the financials of the firm, but how does the firm interact with its community? How does it interact with the environment? And how does it interact with even its own employees? So all of these things go into corporate sustainability. I will say my experiment focuses on the environmental piece of this. And so I think in future drafts, I might narrow the focus a little bit to reflect that. But at the time I was like, oh, I need to have big, broad constructs, you know? But anyways, so that's basically what this refers to. And how does corporate sustainability actually affect the shareholders' decisions? So first, again, there's been this desire for firms to go green because there's this pressure from investors. However, as a result of that pressure from investors, there's also a desire to lie about it. So again, I don't focus necessarily on whether they're lying or not, but I do kind of one of the takeaways is that investors do need to be careful and take what firms say about their environmental efforts with a grain of salt because they do have an incentive to lie about it. For shareholders do pay attention to this, and using such practices might result in an increase in their share price. So we see we have two activities the firm can engage in, and these two activities might have opposite effects. And so that kind of sets us up for talking about how these things interact in order to influence shareholder decision making. So we know that corporate sustainability affects management's behavior. Firms that are involved in sustainability efforts tend to lower the rates with which they manage their earnings. So it kind of looks like being more for the environment or for community tends to make managers less likely to want to lie about their financial status or the status of the firm. It also looks like that if they are engaged in earnings management, they also might be more likely to try and engage in corporate sustainability in order to cover up the fact that they're managing earnings. So we've got this one authentic piece and this one really inauthentic piece. It's kind of, I mean, the conundrum that we live with on a day-to-day basis, right? And then as far as how that affects the shareholder, corporate sustainability might mitigate the negative perceptions of the firm. So we might see that the firm looks better to shareholders if it's doing these corporate sustainability activities, even though it's engaged in earnings management, right? So I designed and explore, well, okay, based on this research, these are the hypotheses that I came up with. So if a firm engages in earnings management, the shareholders will not want to invest in the firm. Basically, they'll withdraw their investment. When the firm engages in corporate sustainability, specifically higher than average corporate sustainability, the shareholders will be more likely to invest in the firm. And then the last one is that earnings management will interact with corporate sustainability such that firms who have engaged in earnings management will look better to the shareholders if they also engage in corporate sustainability. So how did we actually test, or how did I actually test these hypotheses? I designed a 2x2 between subject experiment, and I varied the factors on 2 levels. So earnings management, were they suspected of earnings management? And as far as the level of corporate sustainability, it was either lower than average or higher than average. I actually did have a third level in there where they actually gave exactly average, but it just muddied the results, and so I ended up dropping it for the final version of the paper. I put this up on Amazon MTurk, which I now know from experience is a terrible platform to run an experiment on, but it was what I knew at the time. So I screened them, and admittedly the data is still very rough to work with. It was all over the place. But we ended up with participants who were 36 years old on average and had 10 years of investing experience. I wanted to make sure that these people had some experience with investing so they weren't just putting answers in, So, okay. What information did the participants actually see? So we gave them a letter, or sorry, I keep saying we. I gave them a letter that, yeah, I know, the professorial we. I gave them a letter that from their financial advisor that told them they had $1,000 invested in this company, or sorry, 1,000 shares valued at $40 per share invested in this company. They were then told that the company was engaged in corporate sustainability and were given an analyst report that showed what level compared to average they were investing in corporate sustainability activities. And then they were also told that the client or the firm received a SEC comment letter. One in the no earnings management condition, they saw that the SEC comment letter was just a missing signature. And so it wasn't related to earnings management at all, just the missing signature. In the one where there was earnings manipulation, it was shown that they had manipulated their bad debt expense in order to boost their net income. So they saw all of those things, including the comment letter. How did I actually measure the shareholder decision making? I told them that they could either sell their shares or they could buy up to an additional 1,000 shares in the company. So I could measure whether or not they were more or less likely to buy or sell shares given the information. And then they were given a sliding scale from sell all 1,000 shares to buy another 1,000. A summary of my results, just to make sure we're all on the same page here before we get into the statistics. H1 was supported. This wasn't super surprising. There's a lot of evidence in the literature that earnings management affects shareholder decision making. The point of this hypothesis was mostly to confirm and to make sure that it was consistent with the prior literature. I also found that corporate sustainability does have a significant direct effect on shareholder decision-making in that it increased their, or I should say, it decreased their likelihood of selling because the averages were all in the sell. They all wanted to sell. None of them really wanted to buy new shares. So it decreased the likelihood that they wanted to sell or the number of shares that they sold. And then H3 was also supported in that I found that when a firm had engaged in earnings management, also engaging in environmental initiatives, basically put them back at baseline. The shareholders were they were willing to or less likely to sell their shares off, and the averages were comparable to the case in which there was no earnings management at all. So I also did find, like when I tested the trust variable, it doesn't have any impact on the corporate sustainability piece, but earnings management affected how much the shareholder trusted the firm, and then that impacted whether or not they wanted to buy or sell shares. Okay, the statistics. So these are my sell means. Basically, this is the no earnings management condition. You can see that line is fairly stable, regardless of whether or not the firm was engaged in above average corporate sustainability. But when there was earnings management, this is them selling more than 400 shares, and it went back up to selling about 200 shares. And so that had a significant effect on whether or not the firm or whether or not the shareholder wanted to keep their investment in the firm. Actually looking at the ANCOVA results, so this tested H1, H2, and H3, we can see that there is a significant direct effect of earnings management as predicted by the literature. There's a significant direct effect of corporate sustainability. However, the interaction is actually marginal, not even really marginally significant. That is cut in half, that p-value. So it's not actually marginally significant, but the fact is that when you have an interaction like this, you might not see a significant interaction in the ANCOVA results. So I also conducted a contrast-coded ANCOVA, which shows, so this is the contrast. Basically what I did was I set these 3 points. Okay, can you guys even see that pointer? Okay, I set the top 3 points. I did the average of the top 3 points. And I said, is it equal to this point down here? And the contrast tells me that it is not. It is significantly different from the condition in which we have both earnings management and below average corporate sustainability. So we have a significant result there. Therefore, I feel confident saying that H3 is supported. Why? So the next question was, why do they actually, why does this happen? And so the thought process was that maybe the firm or the shareholder trusted management more when the firm engaged in corporate sustainability. And so basically there's a contract of trust between management and the shareholder that might be violated by earnings management. And it's possible that corporate sustainability would put them back on track. That didn't actually end up happening. So I measured trust using 8 statements. And then this was my moderated mediation model. So basically I was looking at whether or not corporate sustainability impacted the relationship between earnings management and shareholder decision-making. And as you can see, there is a significant path between earnings management trust and shareholder decision-making, but corporate sustainability does not have an impact on that relationship. Therefore, my conclusion from that is that earnings management damages trust, but corporate sustainability works on shareholder behavior through a different mechanism that I don't actually know. I don't know what it is yet. It is possible, I have heard since I did this study, that They're now breaking trust and distrust into two separate constructs. And so it's possible that maybe corporate sustainability lowers distrust, but I would have to actually rerun the study in order to find that out. Okay, so how does this contribute to the current literature? So corporate sustainability can reverse the effects of engagement in earnings management. And earnings management influences decision-making through trust in management. And so especially the shareholders need to consider this before they trust management and before they invest in the company. They need to consider whether or not management is being authentic with regards to their interactions with the environment and with regards to their financial statements. Okay, that's my presentation. So.
Thank you. And we have 15 minutes, although since we are the last session of the day, I imagine we continue 45 minutes. All right. So time for questions for either of our presenters.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
And this actually comes from a comment Mark made earlier in this presentation, and that was about sustainability, which is also financial sustainability of all
Yes.
kinds. And so my question is, is there any literature out there on how certain types of sustainability might be more attractive to people? You know, like there might be sustainability about packaging, and that's not nearly as sexy as if we're planting 1,000 trees for every $100, whatever. But are there certain sorts of sustainability that are more attractive? And is that another possible avenue of research if it's not? Right?
So
This seems like an interesting question. There's so
there
many
has
different
probably been a lot more research that I was not able to incorporate in this presentation just due to time teaching. But I would say I did not see any when I was doing my initial paper, and when I did a admittedly fairly quick Google Scholar search to see if there was new research in this area, I did not see anything to that effect about the different types of sustainability and how they differentially impacted shareholders. So that would definitely be something to look into more. That would be really interesting, maybe to incorporate in future versions of the paper, because I might need to rerun this. So,
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I just want to add an answer to your question. So I think that's very important study. That's a kind of study experiment, and that's about corporate social irresponsibility. So when companies did bad things, then so whether like I cannot remember like whether shareholders or whether like the other firms like also treated like so serious. Then so they're classifying this kind of irresponsibility activity into two types. So one type relates to the local community. For example, layoff employees, okay, or there's pollution in that building. Then another type, okay, maybe about something happening far away, like human rights, okay, and in another country for this company. So they find, okay, so if this kind of irresponsibility relates to the local community, so have more like significant effect. And if it happens far away, right? So maybe like the public, okay, do not care about it.
So there's a geographical significance depending on how far it is. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Find that paper. I need to ask later. More question?
The investments group we're doing, the high school investment club. Well, we started talking about it. Is it called ESG?
Yeah.
So anyway, they've been playing market watch games like crazy for the last 6 months. And they are just all into like making it. So I was very impressed, but we had a couple students, Maddie Thorne and Matt Lyons. So they were brave enough to do a whole hour on the ESG. And I think it might have hit them a little bit. It was very intriguing. But once again, it was I can just look at these young investors. They're just thinking about I got to make as much money as possible, and trying to introduce anything in that has to be different. So I think that what you guys are talking about that. I'm sorry I didn't hear yours, but I'm looking at the description. It sounds like something we did talk so much.
Yeah, I would definitely, well, I will say, students tend to be, especially in accounting and finance programs, very focused on numbers. Like almost too focused on numbers sometimes. But yeah, I think, especially going forward and with how much climate change has been in the news lately, I think, well, the environmental piece is definitely gonna be important. And then just with the amount of, I guess the amount of rage that's kind of present in the world at the moment, I think the CSR is also going to be increasingly valuable because, I don't know, hopefully the companies will see, okay, if the government's not going to do anything, we need to step in and support the local communities more. Yeah, so thank you. Yes, Karen.
Another thing that struck me as you were talking is that long run, there might also be some relevance to general trustworthiness or manipulation of reputation. I think about when Enron failed. And when it initially happened, a lot of people said, well, but Enron was one of the most admired companies. It's kind of like, well, why do you think they were most admired? I mean, they manipulated their reputation, but that did seem to decrease the incentive that investors had to dig deeper and to look more carefully at some of the troubling signs there. And so I think that's kind of related here, just the idea that investors and maybe even the market that people really wanted to believe was so efficient can pretty easily be manipulated by reputation management.
Well, and maybe that if I do end up running this again, which to be honest kind of looks a little likely, but I might add something about reputation, and maybe that would explain the corporate sustainability part. But I will say that I completely lost my train of thought. I was gonna say something. Okay, I lost it. There was something.
You're now officially a senior faculty.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's hard out here. So, yeah, but it's gonna be increasingly important. And firms, the thing is, the firm's reputation, it really does discourage us from looking into them further because we're kind of like, if everybody else believes in us, we should, or everybody else believes in them, we should too. Right? About efficient markets. So markets are unfortunately made up of people, and people have we have so many fallible biases that we can fall into. And so it's just the point, I guess, of this research is to hopefully kind of point out, oh, try to avoid this trap. Yeah. So.
I have another one, I just but are there, for larger institutional groups that buy stocks, it's not all individuals, do they have sets of sort of criteria? I mean, they might not be ESGs, but do they still have certain things that they look at more or less in this field for more sustainability or not? Just like Vanguard or whatever, different kinds of things.
So, okay, yeah, that.
And I don't mean ESGs.
Yeah.
Mutual funds or whatever.
So, yeah, my study does not speak to institutional investors because I couldn't get access to institutional investors. But from what I've read, it does seem like, and from my own portfolio, it seems like it's becoming more important to investors, and so they are taking more into consideration than they used to. But I still think it's mostly driven by which firms are doing the best financially, unless the shareholder specifically says, "Hey, I want you to pick stocks that only."
Right.
So I do think they're, at least from what I've seen at the investment firm that I use, they do seem to be gathering that information, but they don't, unless I go to them and say, I want you to use that information for me, then they're not going to do that.
You do find, I think, funds trying to target different kinds of profiles for a long time, but the social responsibility funds, we're not going to invest in South Africa, we're not going to invest in tobacco or whatever. There's a real rise, I think, of the ESG funds, and I think Sam raised the question about greenwashing earlier. One of the concerns is that there's a demand effect that a lot of people want to buy ESG funds or funds that invest in ESG companies. And therefore, a lot of companies are trying to promote themselves as being responsible. One of the topics on the front burner for the SEC right now is coming out with some kind of standards around ESG. Because right now, it's kind of, you say you're responsible and there's really no reporting standards on that.
Well, and that's actually one of the reasons I call this corporate sustainability rather than just saying environmental initiatives is because the standards board that's been trying to put this together, they call it a corporate sustainability report. And so all of that is like the environmental stuff is all included in that corporate sustainability report that they've been trying for the last probably 5 years to really come up with a set of standards, and I don't think anybody really approves them yet.
This whole thing that you brought up is a very interesting topic that has a lot of nuances to it. And I've alluded to some of them. But I've been in some conversations with some of the senior people at the Value Reporting Foundation, and I attended a webinar which I've alluded to. And the troubling, the emphasis has been on, for some people, it's on reporting. And if you listen to a lot of people, their goal is to get people to complete the report. So they're saying, so we can't make the report too hard, or else the reporter won't do it. But we want them to do it. So it almost, my concern is they want to be in control. They want to be able to say, look what we've been able to do. We've been able to get all these companies to complete our report. We did it. And that's why they've been so adamant that the VRF and then all this other alphabet soup, the International Financial Reporting Standard that now has the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, not to be confused with the International Accounting Standards Board, even though they're supposed to be integrated. They created two units under the foundation that are separate. Try to explain that to me because I'll never understand it. But they've really been trying to get the SEC to pressure it, just like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board inside corporations said, we've got to get the CFO to buy into it. Because if we get the CFO to buy into it, then everyone else in the organization is going to start listening. Hey, she's the CFO. She's concerned about long-term shareholder value, but now she's adamant that we need to become a good corporate citizen. Similarly, the SEC is roughly analogous in terms of a regulatory agency to the CFO, right? So they're also saying, come on, SEC, you have to support this too. And it's all to get clout so that people will fill out the report. However, there are a few people, and I found them, that are saying, and it's a little bit analogous to what I said in my talk. I said, it's not a trade-off, but it's a synergistic relationship, right? And I mentioned that there was one person from BlackRock that said to all the trade-off people, it's not a trade-off, it's a synergy. Well, there are a few people involved in all of this at the VRF that are saying, hey, getting them to fill out the report, that is not the end goal. Hopefully, in filling out the report, it's going to have a transformational effect on how they're thinking from the old-fashioned interdisciplinary approach to what they call integrated thinking and action, which is similar to saying systems level thinking and action. That's what we hope to achieve. But those are the minority of the people involved in this initiative. And the majority are saying, we want them to fill out the report. We want them to fill out the report. And is that going to lead to increased shareholder value? Or for that matter, is that going to lead to actually an improved overall economy, environment, and society? I don't know. But it could be conducive to the greenwashing that you're talking about. But it's just a fascinating thing to watch and to listen to the dynamics and hear the different motives and intentions of all these people that are involved in this group. Because if you go back and read what Mervyn King, who was the original, over the last 25 years, the leading authority in the world on, and the first person to come out with integrated reporting guidelines, if you read his guidelines that he published in 2011, he nailed it. I mean, he got it right. But if you look at where we are now, 11 years later, I think we've got it wrong. We've got it wrong. We didn't stand, on the shoulder of giants. So it's a troubling thing to see how much time and effort I think is frankly being wasted.
So, I mean, we have kind of a similar problem with, I think, with our financial reports that has been somewhat, I mean, we have an auditing industry for a reason. Financial reports, if they have no authentic substance behind them, are fairly useless, right? And so I think the problem now might be that these sustainability reports, if they don't have authentic substance behind them, are fairly useless. And so do we need to set up another, like a sustainability auditing, like board or something? I don't know. I think that might be one solution to that problem, that it's about the substance, not the form.
Yeah, because it's a mess.
It is. Well, that might be because most of the countries can't seem to decide what they want to do with sustainability as a whole. And so.
And Samantha, can you just also, I already got a little confused. What is earnings management?
So corporations can manipulate their bottom line by doing things. So in this study, how I manipulated it was I said that they underestimated their bad debt expense. And by underestimating the expense, they increased their net income.
So it's really earnings mismanagement.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, it is.
just checking, yeah. And then I noticed that you focused on net income, and I'm curious to know why you focused on net income.
So a lot of times, the income statement seems to be the report that most managerial compensation is tied to. And so there's this emphasis on managers kind of they manipulate other accounts that are on the balance sheet in order to manipulate income on the income statement.
My purpose in, Kristen, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard, what Warren Buffett says when people just focus on the income statement.
No, and I think that's a huge problem with how we compensate our C-suite employees is that we tie, and I actually tell my students this in class all the time, I'm like, the biggest problem with employee or management incentives is that we tend to focus too much on the bottom line, which incentivizes short-term thinking rather than a long-term plan.
Well, I mean, it depends. If the bottom line income is net of depreciation and amortization, that's factoring in. That's built into it in the long term. I'm sure most people focus on EBITDA, which, if you follow out the acronym, is before depreciation and amortization, and that's certainly short term. What I was going to say about Warren Buffett is that people that focus on income only, and especially EBITDA, because it's before depreciation and amortization, whereas net income is after depreciation and amortization. So it does have sustainability in it, and net income does relative to EBITDA. But he says if you just focus on the income statement, says Warren Buffett, said you must think the tooth fairy pays for capital. So that to me, the better measure is economic profit, which is simply revenue minus operating expense minus the capital charge. And now you're definitely, to your concern, not focusing on the short term. And but so many companies don't like to address the charge for capital. Why? Because the number's smaller after subtract the charge for capital.
Yeah, it doesn't look as good.
Doesn't look as good, exactly.
Although they could focus on it internally and, I mean, have a different focus externally.
Excellent point. Great, excellent point.
That's the thing is I think that there's a little bit of a conflation between what's good for the shareholders and what's good for the company. A lot of shareholders, they want their return now. The problem is that's not good for the long-term shareholders. And so I think that companies need to kind of divorce those expectations and look at, okay, management needs to focus on what's good for the shareholder or what's good for the company as a whole. And then, shareholder, like immediate profit should be less of a consideration. But the problem is our markets don't work that way.
But I'll share with you, I know a lot of companies that actually use quarteritis as an excuse for not creating long-term value. So think about it. I'm not capable, I don't know how to create long-term sustainable value, and very few corporate leaders do. So it's very convenient for me to say, well, I need to make the quarter because there's all the short-term pressure from Wall Street to keep the stock price up. When in fact, I'm using it as an excuse for doing something I'm not capable, or not doing something I'm not capable of doing.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
I mean, I know people firsthand that love the quarteritis as an excuse for why they're not creating sustainable shareholder value. As I've already said, there's not a lot of people that know how to do that.
That is very true.
It is very true,
I mean,
unfortunately.
we're, the thing is, as humans, we're not very good at thinking long-term or thinking in terms of sustainable value.
I think that's a good observation.
Are we out of time?
Well, I was gonna say, as somebody outside of, who doesn't have the accounting background to follow everything, a lot of this sounds like a challenge of academic assessment too. The challenge of establishing the sort of, are we doing assessment for the reports, or are we doing it for something transformational? So this, I feel like this sort of resonates at a lot of levels. We have reached our time. I just want to take a quick moment. If people do have questions for Grace, I just want to make sure we have time to ask those as well.
Sorry, Grace.
This is a great conference. Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
So,
thank you both.
Well, then let's at least give a round of applause for both of us.
And the concluding remark is downstairs in the balcony again.
It's just obviously the New York Times and had also.
Very nice.
Yeah, and that was nice.
It's really interesting. I don't.
Yeah, that's.
Never thought of that.
Okay.
So and your story really comes to drive.